Good afternoon, and welcome to our third of our Florida Consortium at Metropolitan Research University meetups. You've been here with us for previous sessions. We're glad that you've come back. However, if this is your first Florida Consortium meetup, a warm welcome from all of us here in Florida, and we're glad that you're here. My name is Michael Preston. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Consortium at Metropolitan Research Universities. For those of you who don't know us, the Florida Consortium is a partnership between Florida International University, the University of Central Florida, and the University of South Florida. We all work together on different aspects of student success and student engagement, everything from working inside the classroom to co-curricular experiences, which we're going to talk about today. As you know, many of us started to work from home due to COVID-19 beginning in mid-March, and for almost all of us, we continue to do so today. We used to do a lot of in-person meetings at the consortium, including conferences and events. We're usually sharing best practices and collaborating in support of student success, and this is what we do. However, we've had to pivot in recent weeks to continue our work, and so the Florida Consortium Online Meetups was born out of this idea. For the next several weeks, and we've got a few more coming, starting next week on June 3rd, we'll be meeting online to discuss student engagement, career readiness, the realities of COVID-19 as it relates to education. So please make a point to join us each week, and the roster of Florida Consortium Online Meetups is available on our website. Before I introduce our speaker today, one of which is going to be myself. Hey, you guys get a chance to see me present a little bit today. I'd like to thank the Helios Education Foundation for their great support in our collaborative work. Helios has been a partner since the beginning of the Florida Consortium, and their partnership includes this series. So now let's get started. I'm excited about today's presentation. And Latoya, if you can go ahead and put up the presentation. We're trying to move a little bit fancier this time. Adam's going to take us through a lot of the presentation, but I'm going to start, of course, by introducing us as a group. So obviously you get to see the before and after photos here of our avatars, but myself, I'm Michael Preston. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Consortium. And Adam, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name's Adam Peck. I am the Assistant Vice President, Dean of Student Affairs at Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas.
And if we look familiar together, we actually were separated at birth, so.
You would certainly think so from these avatars. I do want to mention our Twitter handles on there. Follow us on Twitter, especially if you're interested in seeing the most recent work that we're doing and stay apprised on those things. We would love to have you follow us on Twitter and tweet out today if there's anything that you think is worth sharing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam. So a lot of the work today really probably got its start in a book called Engagement and Employability, a book in which I contributed a chapter and Adam edited the book. It came out as a NASPA publication, but 6 different professional organizations contributed to the kind of formation and organization of this book. And it started a national conversation on the relationship between student engagement and their employability when they started to look for work. And it allows for, how students tell their story and why sometimes they struggle with articulation when it comes to the work that they did in the classroom and how that's going to ultimately, and also with co-curricular experiences and how it's going to ultimately land them that dream job. And this is a session overview today. First, employability in the COVID-19 world. I'm going to go through a little bit of how things have changed. If you joined us for our last session, of course, the folks at USF and FIU have been thinking a lot of this too, and so we wanted to add a little bit more to the conversation. And then, of course, the skills today students need are changing almost on a daily basis. And then finally, I'll finish my part with helping students tell their story. I'll kick that over to Adam. And Adam, you want to talk about your session overview?
Sure. From there, we're going to feature some of the newest work that we've been doing, although some of it's really kind of an amalgamation of work we've done previously. But we're introducing something today called the 5 foundational flaws. We've been looking at career development as architecture quite a bit and as project management. So we have a new piece that's coming out this summer, which we call the Campus Master Plan, which we've done lots of presentations on this topic, publications on this topic, including the book that Michael just mentioned, and still some schools have difficulty applying it. So we have put together a one-stop resource with everything you need to really plug and play the idea of helping students develop employability skills through their co-curricular experiences, which we think is more important now than it's ever been. So we're going to go through this one piece of it called the 5 foundational flaws. And these are really the things that we're going to need to address if we're really going to fully implement employability through the co-curricular experiences in a meaningful way. We're going to talk about skill and intellectual development and how those can be mapped through students' experiences. And then we're really going to talk about how we can assess that. So that's an awful lot to accomplish in a 1-hour webinar. So we'll go ahead and dive right in.
Well, employability in a COVID-19 world, and as we have followed the news, we know that probably COVID-19 is not going to be something that just goes away in the fall. As a matter of fact, we might see additional need to pay attention to this subject as we move forward. And really in the beginning, our graduating seniors, if you remember way back to January, and sometimes it's hard to do, our seniors were on track to enter a thriving job market. The unemployment in the United States was hovering at less than 3%. Here in Florida, we had an unemployment rate of just under 2%. And so we knew that there was going to be a strong economy and low unemployment rates for all of our students. And then unfortunately, COVID-19 hit. We have over 40 million who have entered the workforce not of their own choosing because they've been laid off. Now, there has been a few studies out there. The class of 2020 report really kind of makes us where we need to reassess some of the expectations for a speedy hire. As you can notice on the slide, 95% of job seekers, they anticipate hearing back from an employer in less than 2 weeks. And we know that through a lot of the employers we've been talking to, that's just probably not possible with the rate and speed that they're doing their hiring, as well as ultimately the kind of emerging status of COVID-19. And so unfortunately for the class of 2020, total hiring process will take about 35 days, but in reality, it'll take about 45 days to maybe even 5 weeks to kind of get there. Nearly 2 out of 3 or 66% of recruiting professionals saying that they've been ghosted by one of our students. This is an area of improvement that we can definitely work with our students on. I have to be honest with you, I had to ask my 18-year-old what ghosted meant, and she had to explain that, you know, it's basically avoiding a recruiting professional. And unfortunately, that's something that can really make our students look less desirable on the job market as they've been ghosted. More than 1 million applicants will use text messaging to apply for a job in 2019. Once again, to show our age, Adam and I were talking about how would that even work. And so once again, I went to my N of 1 and talked to my daughter, who's 18, and she showed me exactly how she applied for a job at Shipt through text messaging. And it was just really kind of interesting how quickly that worked. And then last, among the class of 2020 graduates, 22% are more likely to get a job in the gig economy. Unfortunately, a lot of those jobs were some of the first that were eliminated. So if they were expecting to work in the gig economy as kind of a course of employment, they might find that those are a lot of jobs that are dried up, or they don't pay nearly as well as they did before COVID-19 hit. Next slide. We do know that non-routine cognitive work, though, still is the order of the day. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they show how the complexity of work has changed since 1983. Over the course of nearly 40 years of research, those things that were routine and cognitive or routine and manual are starting to get outsourced to other ways of doing. So a college degree is even more important over time because we teach non-routine cognitive thinking as a way of doing. And so even for students who might not see the immediate value for college education, over time, the way the job descriptions are written today are certainly asking for that. And job worries. This is from the Strata Institute's weekly updated survey of students. And you can see 18 to 24-year-olds are in that blue bar that's on the left-hand side, all the way to 55 to 64-year-old college students, which of course we know is a small number. But when you really think about who's worried about their job, More young people than older folks are worried about their job. They have lost income or hours. And in the middle there, kind of middle-aged folks, 35 to 44, they would start to look for more education to replace that job if for some reason they lost it, or they would look to change careers. So I think you see direct impact is more on younger Americans, but then a change in trajectory in who they are going to be at the end of this COVID-19 crisis might be more skewed towards middle-aged Americans. And we can see the top skills, common skills that a lot of our students are showing versus what is wanted in the workplace right now. Common skills can be called soft skills, it can be called employable skills, that's interchangeable, but common skills really dictate what our businesses are looking for. On the left-hand side there in blue, you'll see what using MZ data, which is a workforce database, this shows what businesses are asking for with their applications or their applicants. So communications is the #1 skill that they're looking for, all the way down to Microsoft Office, around 15%. On the other side are essentially a meta-analysis of LinkedIn profiles and Indeed profiles across a spectrum of college students and what they report their skills to be. And if you see, there's clearly not an alignment. There are much fewer opportunities for students to talk about the skills that they have relative to what is offered in the job description. And this sometimes could create not only a mismatch, but also have good candidates and students not apply for jobs because they don't feel that they have adequate communication skill, when in fact maybe they do. And that's one of the things that Adam's going to talk about in just a little while. And there's some skills that are growing. Okay, so there's a few on here that are a little interesting. I had to put grilling for some reason as a skill that is growing amongst employers that are looking to hire. Maybe this is the outdoors social distancing part of the restaurant world, that they're going to be looking for a lot more folks to be outside and grilling, which at that point I may change careers because I love a good grilling. But caregivers, as you can tell, friendliness, as people are stressed out on the job, finding employees who are friendly and courteous is going to be more important than ever. I thought finger dexterity was an interesting skill, but we're going to be home typing a lot more from our home offices, so perhaps that's something that's important. And resolve concerns, reliability. So some of these old school work ethic items seem to be more desired by employers now, that ultimately, since they had to change exactly the way that they're engaging the folks that are their customers. And then last but not least, if you had $5,000 and were going to enroll in education in the next 6 months, what would be your goal? They asked students this, and over 60% of them said that they would enroll in something that is more skill-based versus degree-based. So looking to upskill using courses, maybe a certificate or a license, or some other even personal interest. If they were given a little pot of money to go and do that, there's more chances that they would find an opportunity within a skill outcome than necessarily a degree-seeking outcome. So that's something that as educators we have to remember is an important part. So this brings us to telling our story. Why are students unable to tell their story? And I think if I were to go out there and ask all 70 plus of you that are online today to think about a time when a student really struggled to talk about skills that they had earned while they were in a co-curricular activity, or to talk about skills that they had learned in the classroom, I would say a lot of you have had moments where those students have struggled. And probably because both us as educators have need to do a better job of helping students understand the skills that they've achieved, but also because students need to be more reflective in the moments that they are achieving or receiving those skills. And so how can we help them tell the story? And that's really what the blueprint's going to be all about. And so we want to make sure that the master plan is part of every student's master plan as they start to head off into their career field and they navigate through their college career. And then finally, how can we help them change their narrative about the purpose of higher education? You know, most students and even the parents that send them here have a very consumerist nature about them, and that they really believe that it's a transaction. I give you tuition dollars, you give me a degree. That's the way it works. And we know that, and here's one thing I think COVID-19 has really taught us. the experience on campus is really worth something beyond just the transactional piece of it. If it wasn't worth so much to these students, they would not be demanding that the colleges come open in the fall so that they can get back into school, or quite frankly, demanding some of their money back because they believe that the online environment just didn't deliver the same experiences that they signed up for in the first place. So there can be some real push and pull there, and we can help them understand that the purpose of college, while is to sometimes get a job, it's also to become a better person and to really develop their intrinsic skills. So I'm going to hand it over. Adam, you want to take over?
Absolutely. It's funny, as Michael was talking there, what we're really going to cover through the rest of this is quite a bit of work that we've done on this idea of helping students both discover skills that they're developing in a number of environments, and then also promoting skill development along those career skills, mostly those that have been identified by NACE as being those ones that really cut across a number of different industries and occupations. When I get the chance, I get to speak on a lot of college campuses, and I love particularly when I get to speak to students. And one of my favorite ways to start those conversations is by saying, let's imagine that instead of a speech today, this was your first job interview after graduation. And I asked you, tell me about a time you made an important decision that impacted other people. They will all stammer, no hands go up. People look like they're afraid that I'm going to call on them. And then I say, okay, let's do something different. Tell me about a time in a student organization that you had to make a decision that impacted people. Well, that's the moment the light comes on, because oftentimes I'm speaking to a large group of student leaders, and they are suffering from something we have often referred to as the 3-bucket problem. The 3-bucket problem is that they have 3 different buckets. One is their classes, one is their work experience, and one is their co-curricular experience. And when they're faced with an interview question, the only bucket they think to look in at that time is their work experience bucket. So if you ask them a question about solving a problem that impacted other people, their first thought is to think, Dairy Queen, I had to fix the fry-a-later once. They don't have a good example of that from their work experience unless they've really had an internship or a co-op or job shadowing experience, which unfortunately not every student has. And the more disadvantaged you are, the less likely you are to have had that. And then, of course, our entire class this last year had anybody who had internships in the spring very likely had them upended by this COVID-19 crisis. And then think about what a popular time summer is for these, and many of these have dried up. We've got to train them to look in those other buckets. What did they learn in their classes? Did they have high impact experiences they could draw upon? Do they have co-curricular leadership experiences? How can we get them to look in all 3 of those buckets? When we talk about changing and challenging their consumerist notions of what education is for, this slide really kind of captures what we want them to walk away with. This idea that, as Michael alluded to, we act like it's all a big transaction. You give us money, we'll give you classes. You can trade those classes for credit hours. You can trade those credit hours for degrees. You can trade the degree for a diploma. You can trade the diploma for a job. That's not really the way that it works, right? If you graduate from college without any skills or abilities that someone wants to hire you for, then you're unlikely to find work in the field that you want to pursue work in. And so we do see a lot of students who are underemployed, even under better economic conditions than we're certainly in now. So we need to help them reframe this. They are the most important project that they're working on in college. It's not all the papers, it's not all of the group work. I do like to tell students when I speak to them, that all of life is an 8 a.m. class and it's all group work. The 2 things you hate the most are what the rest of life is. Now go out there and do great things, everybody. But truthfully, that part that they try to avoid in college is really what the rest of life is. So if they don't figure those things out while they're in college and develop these skills, they're going to struggle a lot more than they have to. So a few years ago, we put out this model. It's called the Co-curricular Career Connections Leadership Model, or C3. If you're interested in more information about this, we published the initial work on the model in the NACE Journal, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, so NACE Journal. And if you actually just Google NACE C3, it pops right up. It's free. What we wanted to do, you know, Michael referenced that work that today's students have some pretty unrealistic expectations about their job search. They think that they're going to find a career type job in 2 weeks. That's just not the way it's going to happen. Of course, most of us are in the field of higher education, right? If you could actually manage to get hired in 2 years, you'd be happy. Our searches take a long time. So what we've tried to do is take a look at how they can develop their skills across their entire time in college and then translate those skills into their profession. We also know that students have to be disavowed of a lot of other assumptions as well. Most of our jobs you're not going to be able to apply through text messaging. But I can tell you, based on the number of students who reach out to me on Twitter to ask me questions about the university and expect an immediate response, that this is becoming a growing disconnect and something we really need to help them address. Also, they need to understand that a college degree is not a gateway to becoming a senior manager of a corporation in your first job. They need to understand, what's that entry-level job? What skills does it need? What sort of skills will I need in order to advance in my career? And then how can I eventually find the kind of position to which I aspire? So the right-hand side of the model is really about that, dividing up their career into phases. Tim Elmore, the leadership expert, has written, "A leader earns the right to lead others by leading themselves." That's really what the beginning of a journey is about. People tend to get promoted when they show that they can show up on time, you know, follow professional standards, educate themselves about how to do the work better. And so we really try to help students understand that. Now, we do entire webinars on the C3 model. What I really want to point to today is this. Oftentimes when we struggle, we think it's a problem of articulation. Boy, students have all of these skills, but they just don't know how to articulate them. I think there's a certain amount of that. But when we assembled this model, we assembled it around something we call the 5 A's of skill development. We'll talk more about that going forward. But you can see those sort of girding the bottom of our structure there. Awareness, acquisition, application, advancing, and then articulation. We can't begin with asking the question, how can we get students to articulate their skills? You cannot articulate skills you don't have. So we need to think about it from a skill development standpoint. So that's what we're going to spend a lot of today talking about. Now, I promised and previewed these a little bit at the beginning. I think these are going to be more fun than you are allowed to have in a webinar. So some of you may need to clock out and just do this as something on your own time, because unfortunately we're going to make it too much fun. We have looked at what we call the 5 foundational flaws. These are things we need to address in ourselves. We have a tendency to blame the students. These kids today, they don't know what's good for them. But we've got some things we need to fix as well. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with these. So the 5 foundational flaws are the singing frog situation, the daredevil disconnect, the field of dreams fallacy, the Pokémon problem, and the candy factory fiasco. Each one of these is featured in the new white paper that's coming out. Again, follow us on Twitter. When it comes out, we're going to let everybody know. I wish I had a definitive date, but unfortunately, some of the COVID-19 situation has impacted that. So we'll let you know as soon as we have a definitive publication date on it. So let's start with the singing frog situation. So I wonder how many of you in here, and there may be an age line that we would need to draw here. Remember this old Warner Brothers cartoon that I used to see growing up. And it's a story of a singing frog. So this guy, sort of a construction worker type, finds this frog, and the frog can sing. And rather than describe it to you, I actually happen to have a clip of the singing frog. So we're going to watch a couple of seconds of this, and then we'll talk about it.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, come on and tell me I'm your own.
All right, so some of you may now remember what I'm talking about. And in this, as soon as this guy finds the frog, he gets dollar signs in his eyes. How am I going to capitalize on this? So he takes it to a promoter, and he puts the frog up there for it to sing. And of course, all the frog does is ribbit, right? And try as he might, he cannot seem to get the frog to sing. Sometimes we feel like this is the problem with our students, right? We watch them exhibiting all the skills that employers want: teamwork, problem solving, the ability to influence others. These things are on display daily on our campuses. So how can it be that business leaders don't necessarily see in our students these qualities? Now, I would hasten to mention that when Michael and I really started this work, it was because it had really reached a crisis point where business and industry leaders were so disappointed in the quality of students that we're producing that they were really starting to think about, and these conversations continue, to go around higher education and start to train their own people. It's actually kind of interesting that that has declined quite a bit over the last few years, although I think this current crisis is going to ramp it up again. And what we have found is that during times of economic downturn, business and industry tends to cut professional development. That's an easy cut for them to make in difficult times. And then they become less happy with the with the employees that they have, and then they tend to try to blame us for it. It's interesting that the data has been showing recently that business and industry leaders find their students to be ready on day one, but not necessarily ready to be promoted. And so that was one of the reasons we developed the C3 model. How can we help them be ready to be promoted over time? But it doesn't take much of a crystal ball to tell that we're probably going to be going back into a period of time where cuts have to be made, and those may come in the form of professional development, and we may once again be culpable. Also, higher education is in a weakened state right now. We're very vulnerable to attack, and we don't have a lot of friends who are looking to help us. So we really need to, more than at any other time in our history, demonstrate how effectively we're helping students prepare for day one and prepare to be promoted. So that leads us to the next of the 5 foundational flaws, something we call the daredevil disconnect. Now again, for younger people, you could actually count these as continuing education units on what it's like to be born in the 70s, because Michael and I both remember this very well. There was a very famous daredevil known as Evel Knievel. And Evel Knievel made his living jumping over things. So let's get a little bit of an introduction to Evel Knievel.
My name is Evel Knievel. I'm a professional daredevil.
All right, so that's Evel Knievel, right? So one of the most famous jumps that Evel Knievel ever attempted in his life, sometimes people will erroneously remember that he tried to jump the Grand Canyon. He wasn't able to do that, not because it wasn't possible. There are actually places where the Grand Canyon was close enough together, but he couldn't get permits. So he decided instead to jump the Snake River Canyon, and it was nationally televised on TV. Again, we may have a few Gen Z and millennial folks on here who did not live in an age in which there were 3 television networks. Gosh, I feel old right now. So when something like this happened, everybody in the country watched it, and they all watched it at the same time. So we were transfixed by this jump. He had created something he called his jet cycle, and he was going to jump over the Snake River Canyon. So he got going as fast as he could, and unfortunately his chute deployed too quickly. So fortunately it deployed and he lived, but he was unsuccessful in jumping Snake River Canyon. In a way, this is what we ask students to do. The higher education has constructed a bridge, and so has business and industry. But those bridges are almost as if they're coming from separate islands where people speak different languages and use different units of measurement. And so our bridges just don't match up. And unfortunately, the only thing we've been able to do is tell students to scoot to the edge and jump. And so we're asking them to make the most treacherous part of the journey without us. We really need to find ways to bridge those. And again, that goes back to the C3 model. How can we really take their college experience, help them develop more complex versions of their skills as they go, and then help them articulate those skills to help secure their first job, and then also to help them be prepared for success in their first job. We can't necessarily give them the technical skills that they'll need, because even a major that's as specific as something like accounting, there's so many different kinds of accounting and so much different software that different companies may use. So part of it is just giving them that ethic of teaching and developing themselves. So we need to solve the daredevil dilemma. We also need to disavow ourselves of something called the field of dreams fallacy. How many of you remember the movie Field of Dreams? And if you have seen it, or even if you haven't, you know that the one takeaway from it is, if you build it, they will come. Cornfield was whispering this to a farmer, and it made him build a baseball diamond, and the disgraced Chicago Black Sox came back and played baseball, and it was a story of redemption. We have kind of a similar feeling when it comes to student learning. We say, if we do it, they will learn. We even ascribe to these notions of experiential learning. They need to learn through experience. But for those of you who remember reading the experiential learning theory, Kolb, when you were in graduate school, Kolb didn't say we learn through experience. Kolb said we learn through reflection on experience. So the experiential learning cycle is that we have a learning experience, we reflect on it, we think about it, and then we really conceptualize it. We think, okay, this is how I need to do this thing better. And then we try that out, and we see if it works, and then we come all the way back around. I can actually synopsize Kolb for you in 2 simple sentences. We develop skills by doing something badly, then doing something better. That's why the cycle continues to repeat. So we cannot afford to think that the experience is going to do our work for us. We actually need to construct learning environments to help students gain these skills. So again, in the Campus Learning Master Plan, the document we have coming out, what we're going to do is really provide a model, a programming model with specific things that students will need to do in order to successfully gain skills. So, and we'll show you some pieces of that here in a minute. We also have to disavow ourselves of the Pokémon problem. So for anybody who's played Pokémon Go, I'm now working the younger side of the room here. The Pokémon problem is that we tend to treat, I think one of the really good things that has come out of engagement and employability and other work that NACE has done about these skills is that it has helped people understand the kinds of skills we want students to develop. These are the NACE skills here: teamwork, problem solving, leadership, communication, cultural competency, and influence. But the downside is that we treat them like Pokemon. You can just catch them, right? And then once you catch them, you've got communication, that one's in there, and you can keep it forever. There's only one problem with that, and that's that communication isn't a skill, it's a collection of skills, right? And one can be at a lower level of skill development with regard to certain levels of communication. I may be a very good speaker, I may be a terrible listener. I may be really good in small groups, but I may not be great interpersonally. there's lots of different nuance to that. So we need to think about this through a skills mapping framework. And we're going to talk about that going forward too. Skills mapping is one of those things that every time I present it, people walk away and they just say, we should be doing that. That's absolutely right. This actually solves problems we've been struggling with for decades. But then they don't do it because it's, not because it's complicated, but just because it's different. We're going to demystify skill mapping, and we're going to talk about how you can easily do it. And again, not to keep harping on the Campus Learning Master Plan, but it is going to lay out exactly how to do it and even provide you the tools. So those skills, or those problems that we've been solving over time, one of them is learning across time. How do we capture the difference between, say, a student who's been involved in something for 3 years versus a student who's been involved in it for 1 semester? This is one of the struggles. By the way, from a contemporary standpoint, more and more students come in bringing more and more semester credit hours with them, right? Shortening our time with them in the co-curriculum and also muddying the waters. If I wanted to say, well, does a junior know more than a freshman? Well, that junior may be a first-year student. That freshman may be highly involved in something, whereas the junior's only tangentially involved. So again, let's go back and revise. The same way Kolb didn't say we learn from experience, Alexander Aston didn't say that we learn through being involved. What Aston said was that we learn from the investment of psychic energy. It's always been about energy. So we actually have found a way to map the level of investment that students are putting into an experience and using that to target higher learning outcomes. I'll show you that in a minute too. We also need to know how learning connects inside and outside of the classroom. How can we actually truly create integrative environments? Michael talked about hard skills and soft skills. For my career development folks on here, that may cause as much of a wince in you as it would if you said dorm to someone who works in residence life. People don't like the terms hard and soft skills anymore. The reason I persist in using them here is because it makes a nice contrast here. Your hard skills are your technical skills that are related to a specific occupation or academic discipline. Soft skills are those cross-cutting skills that are applicable in any number of contexts. You need them both. In fact, an executive at Boeing was once quoted as saying, "We hire people for hard skills, we fire people for soft skills." You're going to need them both. If academic programs do create hard skills, as they certainly should, they also create soft skills as well. But if we align the co-curriculum to produce those soft skills, teamwork, problem solving, those things that are naturally a part of those experiences, then we have the ability to truly integrate an educational environment in ways we never have before. One of the many opportunities we have in this COVID-19 crisis is that students have time to be reflecting on their learning experiences and making meaning of those. And that may actually be more important than some of the learning experiences they've had to this point. And then finally, we've got to figure out how to help them level up. We can't treat these skills like Pokemon. We've got to help them develop increasingly complex versions of skills as they go. So in doing that, we use 2 different frames within the C3 model. One of them is Bloom's taxonomy of learning, which I think many of you are familiar with. More specifically, Bloom's revised taxonomy of learning. It's the one that has creativity at the apex. But we also created this thing called Peck and Preston's 5 A's of skill development. The source for that is that same NACE journal article that I referenced before. And we shared those before as well. So Bloom's taxonomy: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. The 5 A's of skill development: awareness of skill, acquisition of skill, applying skill, advancing skill, and articulating skill at the apex. You cannot develop a skill if you aren't aware of it. Once you're aware of it, you can begin the process of skill building that helps you acquire that skill. But in much the same way that no one in here would want to get an IV put in by a nurse who had only taken classes online, you need to eventually put that skill into practice if you're going to learn it. Then you can follow along with what Cole was saying, and you're going to experiment a little bit. You're going to learn more. You're going to try different things to advance that skill. And once your skill is at a level of advancement, only then are you really ready to articulate to someone else how you do so. So again, I hope this frame alone is useful enough to you, but we're going to show you how we can use this frame to build our learning outcomes so that as students become more invested in an experience, they tend to develop higher order thinking skills. So these things, Bloom's taxonomy and the 5 A's, really do come together in something that we call the DNA of knowledge and skill development. So you'll notice there in the green is Bloom's taxonomy. In the sort of bluish gray is the 5 A's. So at the lower level of intellectual development, we just have to remember something. In the lower levels of skill development, we're aware of it, right? Then we understand it. We can begin the process of acquiring. Then applying is how these two things come together. Both our intellectual and our skill development, they come together when we do it for the first time. And then we're ready to advance that skill through analyzing and evaluating, breaking it down into its parts. This is where we become more aware of the sensitivities within that. And then we're ready to create new strategies and articulate what we've learned. So how do we use this to frame our learning and development outcomes? So, over the last 20 years, we've really gotten quite good at writing learning outcomes, but oftentimes they're like throwing the whole bowl of spaghetti at the wall and hoping that something sticks. What we are recommending is that we align our learning outcomes to 3 levels of investment. We call them involved, engaged, and leaders. These are terms we all use all the time. We've just given them a specific meaning. An involved student is someone who is new to an experience. An engaged student is, new to an experience or only participating at a surface level. An engaged student is someone who is actively doing the work of the group. They might even be an informal leader within the group. And then leaders. Leaders are folks who are either in formal leadership positions or who have such strong informal leadership that it's really evident to everyone. So what we do is we recommend that you align the work you're doing to Bloom's taxonomy of learning and the 5 A's of skill development. And that's what we've done. So we've actually written learning outcomes for all 8 of these NACE career development skills and shown you how to level them up. So the simplest thing, and actually let me pop back to this slide really quickly. At the involvement level, we want students to be able to do the lower level of Bloom's taxonomy, remembering and understanding. So at the involvement level, we simply want them to know that they can develop these skills and to have some sense of what those skills are. From an application level, again, awareness of skill, and then begin the process of acquiring it. At the engagement level, where they're really doing the work of the group, guess what? They're applying and analyzing those skills. Doing something, and then I'm figuring out how to do it better. And again, applying and advancing is what we're doing there. And then at the highest level, leadership, we want them to evaluate and create. So we want them to, for example, help the group to set some goals and then figure out if you're reaching those goals. That's what leaders need to be able to do. And so that's where we also want students to be able to articulate what they've learned. So that's why we have jokingly said anything worth writing 1 learning outcome for is worth writing 3 learning outcomes for. 1 for an involved student, 1 for an engaged student, 1 for a leader. So also in this campus master plan are these mapped learning outcomes already written for you. So let's take a look. We've got global intercultural fluency there. So at the lower levels, involvement, we want them to be exposed to other identities that they don't possess. Just meeting people who see the world in different ways. They can move up by understanding commonalities and differences between themselves and others who see the world in different ways, and also an understanding of how culture shapes our perception of the world. And then at the apex of this particular learning outcome, we want them to evaluate their own misconceptions and biases based on that information. So we've got a couple of others here. Digital technology. We want them to be aware of common software applications that their group may utilize or that may be utilized within their given profession. And then be able to use these common software applications. So they know about them, they're able to use them, and then finally they're able to evaluate technical solutions to try to solve problems that are facing their group. Oral and written communication. We want them to be able to communicate clearly the purpose of the activities or groups that they're in. At the engagement phase, we want them to be able to describe their own contributions to helping the group fulfill its purpose. And at the upper end, we want them to be able to use language to motivate or persuade. That's what leaders do. So let's go back here and look at a couple of these others. We've got professionalism and work ethic. At the lower level, we want them to understand standards of professionalism and see the work ethic of others. At the engagement phase, we want them to be able to apply standards of professionalism and exhibit work ethic. And then at the highest stage, they model standards of professionalism and work ethic. They also are responsible for holding other people accountable. Career management. We want them to be aware that they can gain skills through co-curricular participation. In the middle, we want them to seek opportunities to advance those skills and to apply them to their chosen career. And then we want them to be able to promote the skill development of others as leaders. Let's look more closely at these last few. Teamwork and collaboration. At the involvement level, we want them to know their own personal strengths. Many of us are using things like Strengths Quest, or you may be using other career development specific things like Type Focus or Siggy 2. Then at the engagement level, we want them to be able to apply those strengths and the strengths of others to fulfill the group's purpose. And as a leader, we want them to cultivate a team and promote collaboration. That's what leaders do. Critical thinking, aware of the challenges of the group. For engaged students, finding strategies for overcoming the challenges of the group. And then for leaders, creating and evaluating goals. And then in leadership, understanding leadership as a process through which people work together to achieve shared goals. This is a fundamental understanding in leadership. There isn't a leader, there is this idea of leadership, something we're all engaging in together. They also need to understand at the engagement level that it's their role to give meaningful feedback and perspective to leaders, and then to seek mentorship to help them develop their own personal leadership style. And then finally, the leader has to cultivate buy-in and motivate the group. I think I ended up going through all of those, which is good, but we're happy to share this work with you. Again, it's going to be in the Campus Learning Master Plan, but you could also reach out to us and get this PowerPoint. We're happy to share it with you. So this brings us to the last piece that we have, which is we call the Candy Factory Fiasco. Some of you may already be guessing what this may refer to. There's a very famous episode of I Love Lucy, where Lucy and Ethel get a job in a chocolate factory. And if you haven't seen it, I'm going to show it to you, and then I'll tell you what we mean.
All right, girls, now this is your last chance. If one piece of candy gets past you and into the packing room unwrapped, you're fired.
Yes, ma'am.
Let her roll!
For many of us, this is what the end of March looked like, or the beginning of March looked like this. We had it under control, right?
Yeah, we can handle it, okay.
But as the years go on, the candy conveyor belt speeds up considerably. This is where I like to add that busy is the enemy of strategic, right? So they start doing some pretty non-strategic things with this candy. So what are we trying to say here? Oftentimes, we are so busy with the day-to-day emergencies that it can be hard for us to take the time to adequately assess the work that we're doing. And while it's disheartening enough that many of us don't have time to do it well, there are also a lot of folks who just don't have the inclination to do it well. I think sadly, even 30 years into this movement of assessing student learning outcomes outside of the classroom, we still see a lot of people who are resistant to this idea that this is a part of our job. This is where I'm going to take a very hot take. It's very popular in our profession to say all of us are educators. And I want to believe that's true philosophically. But my contention is if you are not assessing student learning, you're not an educator. And the reason I say that is because you would be like a faculty member who requires you to write a paper but never grades it or returns it to you. We need to not only assess student learning, we need to let students know what we're learning about them so that they can use it to plan their future learning. So we can't let the candy factory fiasco keep us from assessing student learning. I also want to mention Campus Labs. Annemiek Rice, Michael's friend, my friend at Campus Labs, just produced a white paper on this, or a brief piece of campus intelligence, they call it, asking people about the importance of assessment during COVID-19. And they sort of highlighted in their paper that 48.5% said that it took on an increased importance, and that's good. But it's still troubling that 50%, actually 51%, said that it was unchanged or less important. Man, if you're not thinking about demonstrating the impact of the work you do right now, you are not paying attention to what is going on in higher education. If we don't get serious about demonstrating our impact and the impact we make on student employment, which is a key outcome for most institutions, we should fully expect to get value engineered out of the educational experience, because they're not going to take our word for it. Business leaders aren't going to take our word for it. Our colleges and universities are going to be looking for things that they can cut. And unfortunately, we could be it. So we really need to get serious about assessing. Again, the Campus Learning Master Plan, we actually put together an assessment that is designed to measure that incrementally mapped learning that we're talking about. So each question, this one pertains to communication. We ask students if they gain the skill of communication by participating in co-curricular experiences. Early in this survey, we asked them to identify one co-curricular experience and to use that as their framework. So then we asked them, think about the organization or co-curricular activity that you previously identified. Would you be able to give an example, or would you be able to give us the purpose of that group or activity? Remembering that the learning outcome was, can they explain the purpose of that group? And we tell them, if you do say you can, you're going to have to do it. That actually gives us the ability to demonstrate whether or not they can do it, which is direct assessment of student learning rather than indirect. At the engagement level, we ask them, think about that same activity and then ask us, would you be able to describe how you have contributed to fulfilling the purpose of the group? And then remember, if you say yes, you're going to have to do it. Then we could actually go through that qualitative data, and we can assess it on a rubric, which we've also provided, or we could say, they're way off base here. I'm going to take that one out, and then I'll be able to actually tell what percentage can really do this. Again, direct evidence. Finally, for leaders, we ask them, think about the previous group. Would you be able to give an example of a time you were able to use language to motivate or persuade others? They can give us those examples. We can evaluate them on a rubric. So the rubrics, this one is the rubric for oral and written communication. There's a lot of great rubrics out there, but one of the struggles that many of them have is that they're designed to broadly assess skill development, but not specific enough to know what it is. Each one of these is targeted to those very questions you just read. So, for example, for an involved student, when we ask them, could you describe the purpose of the group? A student at the baseline of that, their answer does not provide enough information to determine if they understand the purpose of the group, or the purpose of the group is unclear. That's a really easy standard to apply. For the benchmark, which is sort of the intermediate, the response indicates that the individual is aware of the purpose of the group, but cannot describe it in a compelling way. And then finally, the response they're able to determine the purpose of the group, and it's in a clear and compelling way. It's a really easy way to determine how effective students are. Now, you know, some of the folks on here may have some experience with rubrics. You might say, well, this would be a lot more sophisticated if it had 5 different levels. We chose 3 on purpose because we wanted it to be simple to apply. If someone is comfortable using a 5-dimensional rubric, they probably are also pretty comfortable in making one. Ours is for those folks who are more reticent to communicate or to assess this kind of skill development. One of the things we have cooking, which is really exciting, and we expect that it could be available as early as early fall, is a board game we're developing called Level Up. Now, you don't really play it as a board game. It's a reflective activity, but it has these reflection cards, all of which are mapped through involved, engaged, and leader. And they could be a great one-on-one assessment with a student where we actually provide a little scoring sheet that you can use to generate assessment. Or you could do it as a large group activity to help maybe mid-semester for a group that you're advising to think about the skills that they're developing. So that each one has a really good question, and then it has some notes for coaching for the practitioner on there. When this is done, I intend to buy a bunch of these for my student organizations and check them out to them. Well, against all odds, I have finished covering a lot of ground, and we have left some time for question and answers. So with that, I'm going to pitch it back to Michael, and I'm going to move us to this last slide so that you have our Twitter information, you've got our emails on there, you've got these handsome portraits of us that you can gaze at while we answer your questions, and would love to hear what questions you have for us.
Thanks, Adam, and certainly want to reiterate that if you want to get some more information on either anything that you've heard today, you can contact either one of us and we will be happy to get back with you ASAP and obviously answer any of your questions. Latoya, is there anything in the chat that you want to add?
Are you hearing me, by the way?
Yes. Sure.
There were a lot of good, just positive comments around today's presentation, thanking you both, and a shout out and kind of woo-woo for the C3 model logo. And the other question, I think, and you guys mentioned it a little bit ago, was around whether or not today's recording would be available, and it will be very shortly after. So that I kind of put all of the comments that kind of came through in that one little breath just there.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody who has an interest in the C3 model to go back and take a look at that original article in the NACE journal. If you're already at a place, and I know there are some folks I know on this webinar who are already beyond that, but if you're at that place where you've been thinking, how can I cultivate a movement on our campus around this? That's what Campus Master Plan is about to be. Just a turnkey way to say to people, let's do this. So hopefully, I wish we were announcing that it's published right now. But again, if you follow us on Twitter, you will definitely know when it comes out.
And I'd like to add too, in closing, that what makes some of the work that we've done over the past few years unique is the incorporation of workforce data into the messaging. And that is something that I think a lot of higher education folks don't do, and look around and look at what both the economy and also those people that work in workforce data are telling us. And I get an opportunity to serve on the Florida Chamber Foundation with the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and I get an opportunity to see where a lot of our economic indicators are going, and that helps inform a lot of the work. And know that a lot of that information is free and open to the public. You can go to your economic development office in the state. You can look on websites like MZ and Burning Glass. They have a lot of information that is free of charge. And then of course, if you pay a little bit more, you can get a little bit more. And then your local economic development or chamber will have lots of information, as well as federal resources as well. And those can line up very nicely with the work that you're doing on campus with your assessments. So with that in mind, we have reached the 3 o'clock hour. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we do appreciate Adam for joining us as well, all the way from Texas, and talking about the post-COVID workplace. We do have 3 more sessions coming up that we hope that you'll join us for next week, June 3rd, at 2 p.m. for the last strategy to the start of the semester, combating drop and non-pay with our students. So as we all are reaching an enrollment crisis, that might be a good one to attend and learn a little bit more about how to keep those students on board. June 17th is centering first generation student success with chatbot technology. That's something